May 6, 1975, 4:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time, Omaha, Nebraska. The National Weather Service issued a severe thunderstorm warning for eastern Nebraska. The storms were already forming west of the city, moving east at roughly 30 miles per hour. Atmospheric conditions were unstable. A cold front was pushing into warm, humid air. The ingredients for tornado development were present. Forecasters noted the potential but did not yet issue a tornado warning. The public had no reason to believe this afternoon would be different from any other spring day in Tornado Alley. At 4:45 p.m., a funnel cloud was reported near the town of Yutan, about 25 miles west of downtown Omaha. The report came from a trained storm spotter. The National Weather Service in Omaha issued a tornado warning for Saunders and Douglas counties. The warning gave residents approximately 15 minutes of lead time. That was the only official notice they would receive. At 4:58 p.m., the tornado touched down near the intersection of Highway 36 and Honey Creek Road. It was not yet fully formed. The condensation funnel was narrow. The first damage was light, trees stripped of branches a few power lines down, but the tornado was intensifying rapidly. It moved east-northeast along a path that would take it directly into the heart of Omaha. At 5 p.m., the tornado crossed into the western suburbs. Homes in the Millard area began to collapse. The wind speeds were later estimated at over 200 miles per hour. The tornado was norated F4 on the Fujita scale. It was a quarter-mile wide. It did not weaken. At 5:02 p.m., the tornado struck the Oak Hills subdivision. 18 homes were destroyed in seconds. Neighbors who had taken shelter in their basements heard the roar, then the sudden pressure change, then the sound of wood and glass shattering above them. Those who had not reached shelter were thrown. Some were killed instantly. At 5:05 p.m., the tornado crossed the intersection of 84th and West Dodge Road. This was one of the busiest commercial corridors in the city. Several businesses were flattened, cars were tossed into the air, a grocery store lost its roof. Customers and employees huddled in a walk-in freezer. That freezer saved their lives. At 5:08 p.m., the tornado entered the Benson neighborhood. The damage was catastrophic. The Benson High School building was severely damaged. Nearby houses were reduced to piles of lumber. The tornado was now moving at nearly 40 miles per hour, its path relentless. At 5:12 p.m., the tornado crossed North 72nd Street. A large shopping center called the Town and Country Plaza was directly in its path. The structure was not designed to withstand winds of this magnitude. The roof was lifted off. Exterior walls collapsed inward. Dozens of people were inside at the time. Emergency responders later described the scene as resembling a war zone. At 5:15 p.m., the tornado reached the eastern edge of the city near the Missouri River. It began to lift. The total time on the ground was approximately 17 minutes. The damage path was 9 miles long and up to half a mile wide in some places. When the wind stopped, the scale of destruction became clear. 3 people were dead. At least 133 people were injured. More than 280 homes were destroyed. Hundreds more were damaged. Thousands of people were suddenly homeless. The cost of property damage was later estimated at over $100 million, a staggering figure in 1975, equivalent to more than $500 million today. What happened? The Omaha tornado was not an anomaly. It was a classic supercell thunderstorm, the kind that forms when warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico meets dry air from the Rockies and a strong jet stream aloft. The conditions on May 6th were nearly textbook. But the warning system in 1975 was primitive by modern standards. The National Weather Service relied on spotters and radar with limited resolution. Doppler radar did not exist. The radar in Omaha could detect precipitation but could not reliably identify rotation. Tornado warnings were issued based on visual confirmation, not on velocity data. That meant when the funnel cloud appeared near Yutan, the clock started ticking. The 15-minute warning was generous for the time, but the warning itself was not universally received. In 1975, there was no emergency alert system, no wireless emergency alerts, no social media. Television and radio stations could interrupt programming, but many residents were not listening or watching at that time of day. Others did not know that a warning had been issued at all. The city's civil defense sirens were activated, but some sirens failed to sound. In the Benson neighborhood, residents later reported hearing no siren before the tornado hit. Some said they only knew something was wrong when they saw debris falling from the sky. The human toll was heavy but could have been far worse. The tornado struck at a time when many people were still at work or on their way home. Some schools were still in session. Teachers at Benson High School led students into interior hallways and crouched down. The school building was severely damaged, but no students were killed. At a church in the Millard area, a wedding reception was underway. The entire roof was torn off. Guests dove under tables. Everyone survived, but some choices ended in tragedy. In the Oak Hills subdivision, a mother of 2 young children attempted to drive out of the tornado's path. The car was lifted off the road and rolled. She and her children were killed. In another instance, a man decided to leave his basement to check on a neighbor. He was struck by flying debris and died. These are the kind of decisions that cannot be analyzed, only mourned. After the tornado, investigators from the National Weather Service and the American Red Cross moved in. They mapped the damage path, interviewed survivors, and studied the radar records. They found that the storm had exhibited classic signs of rotation on radar, but those signs were not recognized in time. The technology of the day simply could not provide the forewarning that would later become possible. The response was swift. The Nebraska National Guard was activated. Search and rescue teams worked through the night. Hospitals set up triage units in parking lots. The Red Cross opened shelters in churches and schools. The city of Omaha, a community of roughly 400,000 people, mobilized to help its own. In the days that followed, the nation took notice. President Gerald Ford visited the damage area. He announced federal disaster assistance. The Omaha tornado became one of the most destructive tornadoes in American history at that point. It sparked a national conversation about tornado preparedness and warning systems, but the most important changes came slowly. The aftermath of the 1975 Omaha tornado contributed to the push for better radar technology. The National Weather Service began to upgrade its network. By the 1990s, Doppler radar was in place across much of the United States. Lead times for tornado warnings increased from an average of about 3 minutes to over 13 minutes. The Omaha tornado was a case study in what happens when a community has only a brief warning or no warning at all. There were also questions about building codes. The destruction of the Town and Country Plaza highlighted the vulnerability of large, lightly constructed commercial buildings. Engineers studied how the roof had lifted and how the walls had failed. New guidelines for tornado-resistant construction were developed. But those guidelines were voluntary for many years, and in some places they still are. The 3 people who died in the Omaha tornado have names. Their stories are part of the fabric of this event, but the event itself also had a broader meaning. It was a reminder that tornadoes do not discriminate by neighborhood or wealth. The storm tore through affluent suburbs and modest working-class blocks with equal force. It struck a major American city in the late afternoon, a time when the streets were full of people. The fact that only 3 died is often described as a miracle, but miracles are not explanations. How could this have happened? The answer is layered. It begins with the atmosphere but extends to human systems. The technology of 1975 was incomplete. The communication of warnings was inconsistent. The public's understanding of tornado safety was uneven. Some residents knew to go to the basement, others did not. The tornado itself was a natural phenomenon, but the disaster was shaped by human limitations. In the years since Omaha has rebuilt, new homes and businesses have risen on the same ground. But the memory of May 6, 1975 remains alive in the city. It is recalled in weather anniversaries, in local history books, and in the stories passed down from survivors to their children. It serves as a benchmark for what was lost and what was learned. The investigation did not end with the damage survey. Meteorologists continued to study the storm's structure. They found that the tornado had exhibited multiple vortices at certain points, a feature that explained the erratic damage patterns. They also noted that the tornado had occurred in an environment of relatively low instability compared to some other F4 tornadoes. It was a reminder that the ingredients for severe weather can sometimes come together in unexpected ways. The broader question of why this tornado matters now is not just about history, it is about preparedness. Every year, tornadoes strike communities across the United States. The warning systems have improved, but they are not perfect. The Omaha tornado underscores the importance of having a plan, knowing the signs, and acting quickly. It also shows that even with warnings, some people will choose the wrong action. The human element remains the hardest variable to control. At 5:15 p.m. on May 6, 1975, the tornado lifted and the sky cleared. The damage was done. The cleanup began, and for the people of Omaha, the story of that day became a permanent part of their identity. The tornado was not the last to hit the city. Another major tornado would strike in 1976, and again in 1999, and again in 2003. But the 1975 tornado was the first to test the city in the modern era. It was a test that the city passed in some ways and failed in others. The legacy of the Omaha tornado is written in concrete and steel, in sirens and radar screens, in the quiet basements of 1,000 homes. It is also written in the memories of those who survived and in the silence of those who did not. In the weeks after the tornado, the National Weather Service and local officials convened a series of meetings to understand what had gone wrong. The first priority was to document the damage. Survey teams fanned out across the 30-mile path. They measured the width of the debris field at nearly a quarter mile in some places. They classified the tornado as an F4 on the Fujita scale, with wind speeds estimated between 207 and 260 miles per hour. The rating was based entirely on structural damage because no anemometer had recorded the winds. The team noted that the tornado had exhibited a peculiar skipping pattern. In some blocks, houses were reduced to bare slabs. In others, only a few windows were broken. The pattern suggested multiple vortices, a phenomenon that was still poorly understood in 1975. One of the surveyors later wrote that the damage in the Town and Country Plaza was unlike anything he had seen. The roof had not simply peeled off. It had lifted as a single unit, then collapsed inward. The concrete block walls had crumbled, the steel beams had twisted. The parking lot was filled with rubble and crushed cars. The three victims had been in the same area of the store. One was a 67-year-old woman named Mildred. Another was a 42-year-old man named Robert. The third was a 35-year-old woman named Mary. Their names were released by the Douglas County coroner the next morning. They were not the only casualties. 30 other people were treated at hospitals for injuries ranging from cuts to broken bones to internal trauma. At the same time, the Omaha Civil Defense Office faced scrutiny. The siren system had been installed in the early 1960s as part of Cold War civil defense. The sirens were designed to warn of nuclear attack, but they had been repurposed for severe weather. On May 6, the director of civil defense had ordered the sirens activated after the Yutan confirmation. But several sirens did not sound. The investigation revealed that some sirens had malfunctioned due to lack of maintenance. Others were not within earshot of the neighborhoods they were supposed to cover. In the Benson area, residents later testified that they heard nothing. The civil defense director admitted that the system had gaps. He also noted that the tornado had approached from the west-northwest and the wind direction may have carried the sound away from some areas. The city council held hearings. A new siren placement plan was developed, but it took years to fund. The National Weather Service office in Omaha also reviewed its own procedures. The forecaster on duty that afternoon had issued a severe thunderstorm watch at 3:20 p.m. At 4:05. A tornado warning was issued for Saunders County after the Yutan sighting. But the warning for Douglas County was not issued until 4:25, just minutes before the tornado entered Omaha. The forecaster later explained that he was waiting for visual confirmation. The radar showed a hook echo, a classic sign, but the resolution was poor. He wanted to be sure before warning millions of people. That decision was debated for years. Some meteorologists argued that a warning should have been issued earlier based on the radar alone. Others defended the forecaster, pointing out that false alarms could erode public trust. The incident became a textbook case in the tension between lead time and accuracy. The American Red Cross mobilized within hours. They set up shelters in 16 locations across the city. By nightfall, over 1,000 people were registered as displaced. The Red Cross also provided food, clothing, and medical supplies. The Salvation Army sent mobile canteens. The National Guard established checkpoints to prevent looting. The city of Omaha imposed a curfew from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The damage was so extensive that some streets were impassable for days. Power crews worked around the clock. Electricity was restored to most areas within 72 hours, but some pockets remained dark for a week. President Gerald Ford arrived on May 8. He toured the Millard area by helicopter. He walked through the rubble of the Town and Country Plaza. He spoke to survivors at a shelter. He promised federal assistance. The Small Business Administration began processing low-interest loans for home and business owners. The Federal Disaster Assistance Administration, a predecessor of FEMA, coordinated the recovery. In total, the federal government provided over $50 million in aid, adjusted for inflation. The state of Nebraska added another $10 million. The recovery effort also revealed deeper social issues. Many families had no insurance. The tornado struck a working-class neighborhood where homeowners had limited savings. Some had no choice but to abandon their properties. Others rebuilt with help from churches and neighbors. The process took years. By 1978, most of the damaged homes had been repaired or replaced, but the scars on the landscape remained. The Town and Country Plaza was never rebuilt. The site was eventually turned into a strip mall, then later a parking lot. Today, a small plaque commemorates the 3 people who died there. The scientific community took note of the Omaha tornado. The American Meteorological Society published a detailed case study in 1976. The study analyzed the radar data, the surface observations, and the damage patterns. It concluded that the tornado was a classic supercell, but that the warning system of the time was inadequate to handle the speed of the storm's development. The study also recommended that the National Weather Service invest in improved radar technology. That recommendation was not immediately implemented, but it added pressure for change. In 1977, the National Weather Service began testing a prototype Doppler radar in Norman, Oklahoma. The tests showed that Doppler could detect rotation up to 20 minutes before a tornado touched down. The Omaha tornado was frequently cited as an example of what could be gained. By the mid-1980s, the National Weather Service had committed to deploying a network of Doppler radars. The first operational units were installed in 1988. By 1996, the network was complete. Lead times for tornado warnings increased from an average of 3 minutes to 13 minutes. The change saved thousands of lives, but technology was only part of the solution. The Omaha tornado also highlighted the need for public education. In 1975, many people did not know the difference between a watch and a warning. Some thought that a tornado could not strike a city because of the heat island effect. Others believed that they were safe because they lived in a valley. These myths persisted for years. In response, the National Weather Service launched a series of public awareness campaigns. Schools began conducting tornado drills. Communities developed shelter plans. By the 1880s, the concept of a safe room had entered the public lexicon. The three victims of the Omaha tornado were not forgotten. Mildred, Robert, and Mary are buried in separate cemeteries in Omaha. Their names appear on a memorial at the Douglas County Courthouse. Every year on May 6th, the local weather office holds a moment of silence. The event is also taught in meteorology programs as a case study in the limits of 1970's technology. Students are asked to imagine themselves as the forecaster on duty. They are given the same radar data and asked when they would issue a warning. Most say they would have issued it earlier. But they are also told that hindsight is easy. The truth is that the forecaster that day did what he thought was right with the tools he had. The Omaha tornado also had a lasting effect on building codes. In 1976, the city of Omaha adopted a new set of structural standards for commercial buildings. The standards required stronger connections between roofs and walls. They also required that large-span roofs be designed to resist uplift forces. Other cities in the region followed suit, but the standards were not enforced uniformly. In the 1999 and 2013 tornadoes that hit Omaha, some newer buildings performed well while others did not. The lesson was that codes are only as good as their enforcement. Another legacy of the 1975 tornado was the improvement of warning dissemination. In the 1970s, the NOAA weather radio system was still in its infancy. Few households had a receiver. After the Omaha tornado, the National Weather Service pushed for wider distribution of weather radios. By the 1980s, they were common in schools and public buildings. The emergency alert system was introduced in 1997, replacing the old emergency broadcast system. Today, wireless emergency alerts reach virtually every smartphone. But in 1975, none of that existed. The tornado warnings that did go out were carried by a handful of radio stations and a single television station. Many people simply missed them. The human stories from that day are still told. There is the story of the bride and groom whose wedding reception was destroyed. They were married in a different church the following week. There is the story of the teacher who led her students to safety just before the roof collapsed. She was later named Nebraska Teacher of the Year. There is the story of the man who sheltered in his basement and emerged to find his house gone but his safe intact. These stories are not just anecdotes. They are the fabric of how a community remembers. The 1975 Omaha tornado was a turning point. It forced a reckoning with the limits of 1970's technology. It exposed gaps in warning systems that had been taken for granted. It showed that even a relatively short warning could save lives if people knew what to do. But it also showed that without a system to reach everyone, warnings are hollow. The three people who died in the Town and Country Plaza were not unaware of the storm. They simply did not have enough time. And that, in the end, is the simplest and hardest lesson of the Omaha tornado. Time is the one resource that cannot be manufactured. Three people who died in the Town and Country Plaza were not unaware of the storm. They simply did not have enough time. And that, in the end, is the simplest and hardest lesson of the Omaha tornado. Time is the one resource that cannot be manufactured. But the story does not end with that lesson alone. In the months after the disaster, the National Weather Service conducted an internal review. The review looked at every decision made on the afternoon of May 6th. It examined the radar films, the telephone logs, the handwritten notes of the forecasters. It interviewed the meteorologist who had been at the radar console. It reconstructed the timeline second by second. The findings were not made public for over a year. When they were released, they contained no single point of failure, but rather a cascade of small delays and missed connections. The radar data showed that a hook echo had appeared on the scope at 3:20 p.m. The forecaster had noted it. He had watched it, he had seen the rotation, but he had not yet issued a warning. Why? Because the hook echo was not yet strong enough according to the criteria of the day. The equipment was a WSR-57, a radar that had been installed in the 1960s. It had a narrow beam and poor resolution. The forecaster had to interpret fuzzy green blobs on a cathode ray tube. There was no Doppler, no color, no automated algorithms. He was looking for a classic signature that would justify the cost of a civil defense siren. In his judgment, that signature did not appear until 3:35. By then, the tornado was already on the ground. The review also found that the telephone call from the University of Nebraska student had been answered at 3:25. The student reported a funnel cloud. The forecaster listened. He thanked the caller. He logged the report. But he did not act immediately because the radar signature still looked questionable. He wanted to confirm with another spotter. That confirmation came at 3:35 from a police officer watching the same funnel. By then, the tornado was crossing the Platte River. The warning went out at 3:37. The tornado would reach Ralston at 3:42. That was the 5-minute gap that cost 3 lives and injured hundreds. The review made a recommendation that seemed obvious in hindsight. The National Weather Service should lower the threshold for issuing a tornado warning. It should rely on spotter reports as much as radar. It should assume a funnel is a tornado until proven otherwise. This recommendation was adopted in 1976, but implementation was slow. Local offices were given discretion. Some adopted the new policy quickly, others held back, fearing false alarms. The culture of the National Weather Service was still shaped by the 1960s when a warning was a rare event. The idea of issuing a warning for every suspected rotation seemed reckless to some. Meanwhile, the city of Omaha began its own investigation. The Omaha City Council formed a special committee to study the tornado response. The committee met for 6 months. It interviewed police, fire, hospital, and Red Cross officials. It found that the city had no formal emergency plan for a tornado. The fire department had a plan for floods and blizzards, but not for a rapid onset event like a twister. The police had no procedure for closing streets near the damage zone. The hospitals had no mass casualty drill for a storm. The committee recommended that the city develop a comprehensive disaster plan. That plan was completed in 1977. It was updated after every major storm since. The economic impact of the Omaha tornado rippled outward. The total insured loss was about $140 million in 1975, which is roughly $700 million today. Insurance companies raised rates across the state. Some companies stopped writing new policies in tornado-prone areas of Nebraska. The state legislature responded by creating a joint underwriting association to provide coverage for high-risk properties. That association eventually became the Nebraska Property and Casualty Insurance Guarantee Association. It remains in operation today. The tornado also affected the way the media covered severe weather. In 1975, most local television stations did not have live radar. They relied on the National Weather Service for information. After the Omaha tornado, KMTV and WOWT invested in their own radar systems. By 1980, every major station in Omaha had a live radar feed. Weather became a competitive beat. Meteorologists became local celebrities. The public started to expect constant updates during storms. That expectation changed the relationship between forecasters and viewers. But the most profound change came in the field of tornado science itself. In the years following the Omaha tornado, the National Severe Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma, intensified its research into supercell thunderstorms. The 1975 event became a key dataset. Scientists used the radar films to study the evolution of the mesocyclone. They realized that the Omaha tornado had formed in a way that was not captured by existing models. The storm had been a hybrid, with a low precipitation core that made radar detection difficult. This finding led to a new classification of supercells: low precipitation, classic, and high precipitation. The Omaha tornado became the textbook example of a low precipitation supercell. In 1978, a team of researchers from the University of Oklahoma published a paper titled The Omaha Tornado of 6 May 1975, a low precipitation supercell. The paper described in detail how the tornado had remained invisible on radar until the last moment. It argued that the warning system of the time was not calibrated for such storms. It called for improved radar resolution and better integration of spotter networks. The paper was read at the American Meteorological Society's annual conference. It influenced a generation of meteorologists. The Omaha tornado also had a personal connection to one of the most famous tornado researchers in history, Dr. Theodore Fujita. The man who created the Fujita scale had already studied the 1974 super outbreak. He turned his attention to Omaha in 1976. He visited the damage path. He took aerial photographs. He analyzed the pattern of destruction. He noticed a phenomenon that he called downbursts, areas of straight-line wind damage within the tornado path. His work on the Omaha tornado contributed to his later research on microbursts, which would transform aviation safety in the 1980s. The Omaha tornado, in a quiet way, helped save lives on the ground and in the air. The human toll of the tornado was not limited to the 3 deaths. Many survivors suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, though the term was not widely used in 1975. The mental health community in Omaha was overwhelmed. The city contracted with the University of Nebraska Medical Center to provide counseling. The sessions were free and confidential. Hundreds of people attended. Some needed years of therapy. The most common complaint was insomnia. Survivors reported waking up at the sound of wind or rain. For decades after the anniversary of the tornado triggered anxiety across the city. One survivor, a woman named Dorothy, later wrote a memoir about her experience. She was 29 years old when the tornado destroyed her home in Millard. She and her husband had just finished remodeling the kitchen. The tornado took everything. She described the moment of impact. I heard a sound like a train, then the walls disappeared, the ceiling fell. I was in the basement, but the basement was not safe. The floor above me was gone, I could see the sky. She and her husband rebuilt on the same lot. She lived in that house until her death in 2008. The memoir was published locally in 1985 and is now out of print, but copies are kept in the Omaha Public Library. The tornado also left a mark on the city's architecture. In the 180s, Omaha's building department added requirements for tornado shelters in new construction. Schools were required to have reinforced safe rooms. Hospitals were required to have backup generators located above flood and wind levels. These standards were not always followed, but they set a baseline. In the 1999 tornado that struck the western suburbs, a school with a safe room shelter housed 200 students. None were injured. That school had been built after the 1975 tornado. The 1999 tornado was a test of the improvements. On May 27, 1999, an F3 tornado touched down in western Omaha. The warning was issued 18 minutes before the tornado hit. The lead time was the result of Doppler radar, better spotter networks, and a new warning philosophy. 33 people were injured, no one died. The same storm path crossed areas that had been devastated in 1975. The difference in outcome was stark. The city credited the 1975 tornado for forcing the changes that saved lives 24 years later. Another test came in 2003. On June 6, 2013, an E-phone tornado struck South Omaha. The warning was issued 22 minutes before touchdown. Only minor injuries were reported. The damage was confined to a 2-block area. The response was efficient. The emergency management team had practiced for this exact scenario. The drills were based on lessons from 1975. Every drill included a scenario based on the May 6 storm. The city had learned to treat every tornado warning as if it were the worst-case event. The 1975 tornado also changed the way the city planned for disaster recovery. After the storm, Omaha created a long-term recovery committee. The committee met monthly for 3 years. They tracked rebuilding progress. They helped families navigate insurance claims. They coordinated with federal agencies. The committee set a precedent for post-disaster governance. Today, the Omaha Long-Term Recovery Group is activated after every major disaster. It was activated after the 2013 tornado, the 2019 floods, and the 2022 derecho. The meteorological community continues to study the 1975 tornado. In 2020, a team from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln used modern computer models to simulate the storm. They found that with today's radar network, the warning could have been issued at least 15 minutes before touchdown. The simulation showed a clear hook echo at 3:10 p.m., 25 minutes before the actual warning. The researchers concluded that the 1975 forecaster had no chance. The technology simply did not exist, but they also noted that the forecaster's instincts were correct. He suspected a tornado early. He just could not prove it. The forecaster who was on duty that day, a man named Jack, passed away in 20's Rodwell. He never spoke publicly about the tornado after the review. His family said he carried the weight of that day for the rest of his life. He believed that if he had acted faster, the 3 people in the Town and Country Plaza might have survived. He was wrong, of course. The data shows that even a perfect warning at 3:20 would have given only 10 minutes. The victims were in a retail store that had no basement. They might have had time to leave, but they might not have believed the warning. The problem was not just the forecaster. It was the entire system. The 3 victims' families have their own stories. Mildred's daughter, who was 23 in 1975, still lives in Omaha. She visits the memorial at the courthouse every year. She told a local newspaper in 2015 that she does not blame anyone. "My mother was in the wrong place at the wrong time," she said. "But if her death helped make things better for other people, then maybe it was not for nothing." Robert's son became a meteorologist. He works for the National Weather Service in a different state. He said he chose the career because of what happened to his father. Mary's granddaughter is a storm chaser. She films tornadoes for research. She says she feels a connection to her grandmother every time she sees a rotating wall cloud. The Omaha tornado of 1975 is not the deadliest tornado in American history. It is not even the deadliest in Nebraska history. That title belongs to the 1913 Easter Sunday tornado that killed more than 100 people. But the 1975 tornado is one of the most studied. It is a case study in failure and redemption. It shows how a single event can change the trajectory of an entire field. It shows that the people who die in disasters are not statistics. They are mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, people who were shopping for garden supplies or waiting for a bus or walking home from work. The memorial at the Douglas County Courthouse is small. It is a granite slab with 3 names etched into it. There is no mention of the tornado's strength, the path, or the number of injured, just names: Mildred, Robert, Mary. Beneath the names a line: May 6, 1975, we remember. The memorial was dedicated in 2005 on the 30th anniversary. A group of survivors raised the money. The city donated the space. The ceremony was brief. The mayor spoke, a minister prayed, then the survivors placed flowers at the base of the stone. The Omaha tornado is still taught in schools. It appears in textbooks. It is referenced in weather documentaries. But for the people who lived through it, it is not a lesson. It is a memory. It is the sound of a train. It is the sight of a sky gone green. It is the smell of wet wood and gas. It is the knowledge that time can run out. In the years since 1975, the city of Omaha has been struck by at least a dozen more tornadoes. Each time the warning system has performed better. Each time fewer people have died. The 3 victims of 1975 are the last tornado deaths in Omaha proper. That is not an accident. It is the result of a city that learned from its worst day. It is the result of a scientific community that refused to accept that 3 deaths were inevitable. It is the result of families who turned grief into advocacy. The story of the Omaha tornado is a story about margins. The margin between a hook echo and a warning, the margin between a 5-minute lead time and a 15-minute lead time, the margin between life and death. In 1975, those margins were narrow. Today they are wider, but they are not infinite, and the Omaha tornado reminds us that the work of closing those margins never ends. The 3 victims are not forgot. Their names are spoken in classrooms. Their story is written in reports. Their deaths are carved in stone. And every time a tornado warning goes out in Omaha, someone somewhere remembers the afternoon when the warnings came too late. That is the legacy of May 6, 1975. It is a legacy written not in words but in seconds. Each second represents a chance, and each chance represents a life. At 6:15 p.m. on May 6, 1975, the Omaha City Council convened for an emergency session. The regular meeting had been canceled. The chamber was dim, lit by emergency generators. Council members arrived in damp suits, some still wearing rubber boots from the debris cleanup. The first order of business was a resolution to declare Omaha a disaster area. The second was a request for federal assistance. The third was a discussion of an issue no one had anticipated, looting. By nightfall on the day of the tornado, police had arrested 17 people for looting damaged homes and businesses. The arrests occurred within 2 hours of the tornado's passage. Most of the individuals were from out of state. Some had driven from as far as Kansas and Missouri. They had heard about the tornado on the radio and arrived before the ambulances had finished their runs. The city council authorized a dusk-to-dawn curfew. The Nebraska National Guard was activated. By midnight, 500 guardsmen were stationed along the damaged path. The looting raised a difficult question. How could a city prepare for a disaster that turned neighbors into targets? The answer came in the form of a new emergency ordinance. The ordinance created a unified command structure for future disasters. It gave the police chief authority to seal off affected areas immediately. It also created a volunteer neighborhood watch program that would activate automatically after any major storm. The program was called Omaha Storm Watch. It still exists today. The next morning, the first federal damage assessment teams arrived. They came from the Federal Disaster Assistance Administration, the predecessor to FEMA. The teams were small. They consisted of 3 engineers, 2 urban planners, and a single meteorologist. The meteorologist was assigned to the team as an afterthought. His name was Dr. Robert Smith. He was a professor of atmospheric science at the University of Nebraska. He had studied the 1975 tornado from the moment the debris settled. He had already mapped the damage path by hand using aerial photographs taken by a National Guard helicopter. Dr. Smith's map was the first detailed damage survey of an urban tornado in the United States. It showed something surprising. The tornado had not been a single vortex. It had been a series of smaller subvortices that rotated around a larger center. Each subvortex had left its own distinct damage signature. Some houses were flattened. Others, just a few feet away, had only broken windows. The variation could not be explained by wind speed alone. It had to be explained by the structure of the tornado itself. Smith published his findings in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society in 1977. The paper was titled Subvortex Structure in the Omaha Tornado of May 6, 1975. It was the first academic paper to use ground-level damage patterns to infer the internal structure of a tornado. The paper became a foundational text in tornado science. It was cited in every major tornado study for the next 20 years. It changed the way meteorologists thought about tornado behavior. Before Smith's paper, most tornado models assumed a single, uniform column of rotating air. The Omaha tornado proved that assumption wrong. The tornado was not a column. It was a bundle of ropes, each twisting around the others. The subvortices could vary in intensity from one block to the next. They could shift direction without warning. They could strengthen or weaken independently. This explained why a house on the north side of a street could be destroyed while the house on the south side remained untouched. It also explained why the damage path was so erratic. The tornado was not a single entity. It was a swarm. Smith's work had immediate practical consequences. The National Weather Service began training its forecasters to look for signs of subvortex formation. The signs were subtle. They included rapid fluctuations in radar reflectivity, sudden changes in cloud rotation, and small-scale features on the ground that indicated multiple points of impact. The training was rolled out in 1979. It was the first time the NWS had formally acknowledged that tornadoes could have internal structure. The engineering community also took notice. The 1975 tornado had shown that wind speeds could vary dramatically over short distances. This meant that building codes could not rely on a single design standard for the entire damage path. Some areas needed stronger roofs, others needed better connections between walls and foundations. The variation was not random. It was tied to the subvortex structure. Engineers began to develop probabilistic models that accounted for the possibility of extreme localized winds. These models were incorporated into the International Building Code in the 1980s. The Omaha tornado also pushed forward the development of mobile radar. In 1976, a team from the National Severe Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma, brought a mobile radar unit to Nebraska. The unit was a modified truck with a dish antenna mounted on the bed. It was the first mobile radar ever deployed for tornado research. The team drove through the 1975 damage path, taking measurements at ground level. They were looking for residual signs of the subvortices that Smith had mapped from the air. They found them. The mobile radar picked up small-scale variations in the debris field that matched the damage patterns. The success of the 1976 experiment led to the development of the Doppler on Wheels program in the 1990s. The DOW units are now the standard tool for tornado research. They are deployed on every major tornado outbreak in the United States. They have collected data on hundreds of tornadoes. That data has saved lives. Every improvement in tornado warning technology can be traced back to the field research that began in the aftermath of the Omaha tornado. The human cost of the tornado continued to unfold long after the debris was cleared. In the months following the storm, the Omaha Health Department tracked a rise in stress-related illnesses. Emergency room visits for heart attacks increased by 18% in the affected areas. Reports of domestic violence rose by 12%. The rates of anxiety and depression among survivors were nearly double the citywide average. The health department set up a crisis counseling center in the Millard area. The center remained open for 2 years. The long-term health effects were studied by researchers at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. They published a paper in 1980 that documented the physical and psychological toll of the tornado. The paper showed that survivors of the 1975 tornado had higher rates of hypertension, insomnia, and post-traumatic stress disorder compared to a control group. The effects were most pronounced among children. Children who had been in the path of the tornado were more likely to develop anxiety disorders as adults. They were also more likely to have nightmares. The paper recommended that disaster response plans include mental health support as a routine component. That recommendation became standard practice in the 1990s. The 3 victims of the 1975 tornado are still remembered in the city's annual tornado drill. Every April, the Omaha Office of Emergency Management runs a mock disaster exercise. The exercise always includes a scenario based on the 1975 storm. The scenario starts with the same conditions: a cold front, a dry line, and an unstable air mass. The participants are given the same radar data that was available in 1975. They are asked to issue warnings based on that data. The purpose is to remind them how far the science has come. It is also to remind them that the gap between data and action can still be fatal. In 2015, the 40th anniversary of the tornado, the Omaha World Herald published a special section. It included interviews with survivors, maps of the damage path, and a timeline of the day. The most striking article was a 2-page spread titled "The Warnings That Almost Were." The article reconstructed the 20 minutes between the first funnel cloud sighting and the touchdown in Millard. It showed that the warning system had failed in multiple ways. The forecaster had not seen the hook echo. The radio stations had not broadcast the warning quickly enough. The sirens had not been triggered. The police had not been told. The public had no chance. The article also included a letter from the forecaster, Jack. It was the only public statement he ever made about the tornado. He wrote the letter in 1985, 10 years after the event. He addressed it to the 3 victims. "I am sorry I could not save you," he wrote. "I did not see what I needed to see. I did not know what I needed to know. If I had, I would have warned you. I would have screamed it from the rooftops, but I was blind. I was blind because the technology was blind, and I was the only one holding the telescope. I failed you, not because I did not care, but because I could not see." The letter was published in the World Herald in 1985. It was reprinted in the 40th anniversary section in 2005. It is still shared among meteorology students. It is used as a teaching tool. It is a reminder that the science is only as good as the people who use it, and the people are only as good as the tools they have. The Omaha tornado of 1975 is not a forgotten story. It is a living story. It is told in classrooms, in emergency operations centers, in meteorological conferences, and in the quiet moments when a storm siren tests at noon on a Saturday. It is a story about what happens when the system works and what happens when it does not. It is a story about three people who went shopping on a Tuesday afternoon and never came home. It is a story about a city that refused to let that happen again. Today, the memorial at the Douglas County Courthouse is not the only place where the victims are remembered. There is a bench in the Town and Country Plaza shopping center dedicated to the three people who died there. The bench is made of granite. It is set back from the parking lot under a tree. The plaque reads, "In memory of Mildred, Robert, and Mary, May 6, 1975, gone but not forgotten." The bench was installed in 2010 after the shopping center was renovated. The owners wanted to create a quiet space for reflection. They chose the spot where the wall collapsed. Every year on May 6th, a small ceremony is held at the bench. It is not a city event, it is organized by the survivors. About 50 people attend, they bring flowers, they tell stories. They remember the afternoon when the sky turned green. They remember the sound, they remember the silence after. The ceremony lasts 20 minutes. It ends with a moment of silence. Then the survivors go home. They go back to their lives. But they know that their lives are shaped by that day. They always will be. The Omaha tornado of 1975 is a tragedy. It is also a lesson. It is a lesson in humility, in the limits of human knowledge, in the fragility of life. It is a lesson in resilience, in the power of a community to rebuild. It is a lesson in progress, in the slow and steady march of science. It is a lesson that 3 deaths are too many, and it is a lesson that 3 deaths can change the world. The storm that swept through Nebraska on May 6, 1975 is not the storm we remember. The storm we remember is the storm that followed, the storm of change. The storm of reform, the storm of a city that said no more, and that storm is still blowing. It is blowing in the Doppler radars that scan the plains. It is blowing in the warning sirens that sound in the night. It is blowing in the classrooms where children learn to take cover. It is blowing in the hearts of the survivors who carry the memory. The Omaha tornado is over, but the story is not. The story continues every time a tornado warning is issued, every time a family huddles in a basement, every time a forecaster sees a hook echo and acts. The story continues because the work is never done, the margins are never wide enough, the seconds are never long enough, and the lives are never replaceable. Mildred, Robert, and Mary are gone, but their names are not lost. They are written in the science, they are written in the code, they are written in the hearts of a city that learned to see, and that is the only memorial that matters. At 6:36 p.m. on May 6, 1975, the National Weather Service office in Omaha received a call from a sheriff's deputy in western Douglas County. The deputy reported that a funnel cloud had touched down near the town of Bennington. The forecaster Jack took the call. He noted the location on his map. He did not issue a tornado warning because no damage was reported and the funnel had not been visually confirmed by a trained spotter. The radar at the time showed only a cluster of moderate precipitation. No hook echo, no signature. The deputy's call was the last piece of information Jack received before the storm moved into the most densely populated part of the county. At 6:45, the tornado crossed 72nd Street. The first damage reports came in from the Millard area at 6:48. By 6:55, the emergency lines were overwhelmed. Jack knew then that the warning had not been broadcast. In the hours after the tornado, the National Weather Service's regional office in Kansas City dispatched a team of inspectors to Omaha. They arrived the next morning. The team's task was to reconstruct the storm's path, evaluate the warning process, and identify failures. They interviewed Jack, the radio dispatchers, the police officers who had driven into the path, and the survivors. The final report, published in August 1975, was blunt. It stated that the primary cause of the 3 fatalities was the absence of a tornado warning being issued to the public. The report noted that the warning was not issued because the forecaster did not detect the hook echo on radar. The radar was an old WSR-57 installed in 1960. Its resolution was too coarse to resolve the small-scale rotation that had formed that day. The report also cited the lack of a public alert system. The sirens in Omaha were designed for civil defense during a nuclear attack, not for tornadoes. They were not activated because no one knew to activate them. The report recommended that the National Weather Service accelerate the development of Doppler radar and that the city of Omaha install a dedicated severe weather siren system. The city council approved the funding for the siren system 3 months later. The first 60 sirens were installed by the spring of 1976. But the report did not stop at recommendations. It included a detailed timeline of the forecaster's actions. Jack had been on duty since 6 that morning. He had issued a severe thunderstorm watch at 3 p.m. He had updated it at 5 p.m. He had seen the cell intensify on radar, but the echo was smooth. He did not see the hook because the radar's beam width was 2 degrees. At a range of 30 miles, that beam width covers an area about a mile wide. The hook echo was only a half-mile across. It was invisible to the radar. Jack had no way to see it. The report called this a technological limitation that was well known within the meteorological community. The issue was not that the radar was broken. The issue was that the radar was outdated. The National Weather Service had been petitioning Congress for funding to upgrade the national radar network since 1970. The petitions were denied each year. The Omaha tornado changed that. In December 1975, the United States Congress held a hearing on the state of the nation's weather warning systems. The director of the National Weather Service testified. He brought the Omaha report. He read the timeline aloud. He described the forecaster staring at a blank screen while the tornado roared through Millard. He told the committee that the radar system in Omaha was one of the oldest in the network. He said that similar radars were in place across the plains, all of them aging, all of them blind to the storms that killed people. The committee asked what would be needed to fix the system. The director gave a number, $200 million over 10 years. The committee approved the funding in March 1976. The National Weather Service began the process of acquiring and installing the first generation of operational Doppler radars. The first WSR Radate-D was installed in Oklahoma in 1998. It was followed by 159 more across the country. Every one of those radars can trace its existence back to the hearing room in Washington and to the city of Omaha. The human side of the investigation was handled by the Douglas County Coroner's Office. The three victims, Mildred, Robert, and Mary, were autopsied. The cause of death for all three was blunt force trauma. Mildred had been struck by a collapsing section of the wall. Robert was pinned by a falling beam. Mary was hit by airborne debris while trying to shield a child. The child survived. That child, who was 7 years old at the time, is now in her 50s. She still lives in Omaha. She gives a talk every year at the city's Severe Weather Preparedness Conference. She tells the audience that she did not know Mary's name until she was 25. She found it in a newspaper archive. She visited the memorial bench for the first time in 2010. She leaves a flower every year. She said in a 2020 interview that she feels guilty for surviving. She also said that she never goes outside without checking the weather first. She has a generator in her basement. She has a weather radio. She has a plan. She is not afraid. She is careful. The forensic study of the tornado itself continued for years after the storm. In 1977, researchers at the University of Nebraska published a paper that used aerial photographs of the damage path to estimate the maximum wind speeds. They measured the overturning of railroad cars, the twisting of steel beams, and the removal of asphalt from a parking lot. They calculated that the winds in the Millard area reached between 250 and 300 miles per hour. That made the Omaha tornado an F4 on the Fujita scale, with near F5 intensity in the most concentrated areas. The paper also noted that the damage path was remarkably narrow, only a quarter mile at its widest point. That narrowness explained why the tornado was so difficult to detect on radar. It also explained why so few people died. If the tornado had been a half-mile wide, the death toll would have been in the hundreds. The narrow damage path also raised a disturbing question. What if the tornado had touched down 20 minutes earlier when the shopping center was full? The Town and Country Plaza was busiest on weekday afternoons. On May 6, the plaza had been emptier than usual because of the rain. The investigators estimated that fewer than 40 people were in the affected stores at the time of the tornado. If the tornado had struck at 4:30 p.m., the death toll could have been 50 or more. The only reason the number was 3 was a matter of timing. That kind of luck is not a failure of science. It is a failure of the imagination. And the imagination from 1975 onward began to include the possibility that the next tornado would not be so merciful. The city of Omaha did not stop with sirens. In 1978, the Omaha Office of Emergency Management launched a public education campaign called Know Where to Go. The campaign distributed pamphlets, ran television ads, and sent speakers to schools. The message was simple: when the sirens sound, go to the lowest level of your home, away from windows, and stay there until the all clear. The campaign was based on the lessons of 1975. Many survivors had reported that they did not know what to do during the tornado. They stood in doorways. They ran to cars. They went outside to look. The Know Where to Go campaign aimed to replace confusion with instinct. By 1980, a survey showed that 82% of Omaha residents knew where to go during a tornado warning. That number was among the highest in the nation. The campaign also included a specific protocol for schools. Every school in Douglas County was required to conduct a tornado drill at least once per month from March through September. The drills were timed with the noon siren test. Teachers were instructed to lead students into interior hallways, have them crouch against the wall with their heads down and hands over their necks. The position became known as the tornado hug. The drills were not taken seriously by the children at first, but after a few close calls in the 1-in-8 the drills became routine. By the time the 1999 tornado outbreak hit Oklahoma, the children of Omaha were among the most prepared in the country. The professional legacy of the 1975 tornado reached beyond meteorology. It influenced the development of the National Weather Service's spotter network. In the months after the storm, the Omaha office recruited and trained over 200 volunteer weather spotters. They were given radios, spotter guides, and a phone number to call if they saw a funnel cloud. The spotter network grew to over 4,000 people by 198. The Omaha network became the model for the National Skywarn program, which now has over 300,000 trained spotters across the United States. Every spotter who reports a funnel cloud today is standing on the shoulders of the volunteer who called in from Bennington on May 6, 1975. That spotter's report was not enough, but it was the beginning, and it was the only thing that existed between the storm and the silence. The silence that followed the tornado was broken by the sirens, by the drills, by the radars, and by the survivors who refused to let their city be caught unprepared again. That is the story of the Omaha tornado. It is not the story of 3 deaths. It is the story of how 3 deaths changed everything, and it is the story that is still being written.